So how do I make a video on bonds that people will be interested in? So most people don't pay a whole lot of attention to individual bonds and how the bond market works, but the bond market is actually larger than the stock market and definitely has an influence on the stock market. I believe to really understand markets in general, you have to understand both the stock and bond market and how they work. Also, because of the large spike in interest rates in 2022 and 2023, most bonds trade below par, which means when they mature at par, that's a capital gain, which is a tax advantage compared to other debt instruments like GICs and other interest-bearing instruments. So my goal today is to give you a simple understanding of how bonds work, take away any mystery surrounding bonds, and show you how they may fit into your portfolio. Let's look at the mechanics of how an actual bond works. I have a bond here from the 1800s. This is a piece of history. And bonds work exactly the same way today. Once you understand how this works, you'll understand how bonds work generally speaking. And you may be surprised at how simple it is. Let's take a look. In the past, before bonds were digital, you would clip off the coupon, bring it to the bank, and get, in this case, your $35. Here's a close-up of the coupon that you would clip off. Notice that the coupon itself is a contractual obligation. So this is how it works. You buy the bond originally for $1,000. Every 6 months, in January and July, you would clip off your coupon, bring it to the bank, and receive $35. $35 times 2, twice a year, is $70. 70 divided by 1,000 is, of course, 7%. As such, this bond pays 7% a year in simple interest. At the end of the term, in this case 30 years, but note that you can also buy bonds for 5 years, 10 years, etc. Whatever that term is, once it's matured, you would get your $1,000 back. And that's it. It's as simple as that. That's how bonds work. You buy the bond originally for $1,000. In the interim, you get your coupon payments, in this case 7%. At the end of the term, you get your original principal of $1,000 back. So just like you can buy more than one stock, you can also buy more than one bond. Let's say you bought $1 million worth of this bond. In that case, at 7%, the interest payments would be $70,000 a year. And that interest payment would be a contractual obligation. It would be issuer guaranteed. And even if the company missed one coupon payment, they would have to go into receivership. That's a default. So one question I get asked is this: if the bond payments are predetermined, why do bonds go up and down in value? That's a great question. If you buy a bond and you hold it to maturity, similar to a GIC, then you know to the penny the cash flow that you are owed, provided the issuer is solvent, just like a GIC. With a bond, however, you have the option of selling it. And that's where things start to get a little bit complicated. To illustrate, let's say we want to sell this bond to Mr. Market, obviously representing the bond market. So we buy our 7% bond, we're happy, and shortly afterwards, interest rates drop down to 1%. Now in that interest rate environment, Mr. Market can only get 1% in his bank account, and he needs more yield. He may offer you, for example, $1,100 for the bond you paid $1,000 for, because even with the extra cost, he's still making more money than he would make otherwise. In other words, because interest rates went down, the value of our bond went up. Again, if we decide to hold to maturity, that may not matter. Conversely, let's say interest rates went up to 20%. And I'm obviously using extreme examples just for the purpose of illustration. Now, would Mr. Market pay you full price for your 7% bond when he could make 20%, let's say, in his bank account? And the answer is obviously not. So in this case, interest rates went up and the value of the bond went down. I hope that makes sense. So how would this look in your portfolio? And what are these tax advantages that I talked about earlier? Let's take a look. This is a sample of what a bond portfolio may look like. Notice the format. It's simply the issuer name, in this case John Deere or Loblaws or Apple, then the coupon, and then the date. And I've broken the coupon and the date down here in these columns just for ease of use. You'll notice also that the maturity dates are staggered. And I actually like to buy bonds in what's called a bond ladder. I like knowing that there's money maturing multiple times a year. And in fact, for my clients, I do a 7-year bond ladder with 3 or 4 bonds coming due every single year. Now, I'm not showing a full 7-year bond ladder here. I'm just showing a few for simplicity. But again, typically I like bonds coming due every year all the way out to 7 years. And we could talk about the length. It can be a 10-year bond ladder, a 7-year, a 5-year. That's for another video. Earlier, we talked about bond prices going up and down in the opposite direction of interest rates. You may intuitively surmise that a bond that's due very shortly, that's called a low duration, won't react as much to interest rates, and you would be correct in that assumption. So this June 10th bond due this year would vary a lot less than, for example, this bond, which is due in over 6 years from now. Another interesting thing to look at is the price we pay for the bond. These bonds trade under par, so we could buy them for less than $100, and we know that they mature at $100. So if we can buy them at 89 or 90 and they mature at 100, that's a capital gain. Let's assume for the moment that you're in the highest tax bracket, and also you're investing in a non-registered account, so it's a taxable account. Quick side note, in this video, for simplicity, I use round numbers. So I use a tax of 53%. The actual top marginal tax rates depends on your province. So in Ontario, for example, it's 53.53%. And if you own a corporation and have investment income, it's a flat tax. So it's not marginal like it is for personal. And that flat tax in Ontario is 50.17. And again, all provinces are listed here. If you'd like this document, it's the 2024 Wealth Planning Facts and Figures, and it's available upon request. So marginally, or on your next dollar of interest earned, your tax bracket is 53%. If you make $100,000 in interest and you're taxed at 53%, then you're paying $53,000 in tax. With a bond, however, part of that return is a capital gain because, again, perhaps we bought it at 90 and it matured at 100. And in Canada, capital gains are taxed at half the rate of interest. So note that, for example, for this Bell bond, the coupon is still fully interest. So this 2.5% is fully taxable. It's the buying it at 89 and maturing at 100 part that is a capital gain. This is not the case for strip bonds, which we can talk about in another video. So if an investor earned $100,000 in capital gains as opposed to in interest, then the tax would only apply to half of that capital gain, which is $50,000. In this scenario, the tax would be 53% of $50,000, which is $26,500, as opposed to the full $53,000 of tax if it was interest income. Again, I want to emphasize that this only applies to the capital gain and not to the coupon, which is considered interest income. I also want to note that this is information only and definitely not tax advice. If you'd like tax advice, please talk to your tax professional. So I hope you learned a thing or two about how bonds work, how they may complement an equity portfolio, and how they differ from GICs and other debt instruments. If you have any more questions, don't hesitate to reach out. Until next time, happy investing.